Hi, fellow believers in Christ. Today, I just wanted to share with you that we should definitely listen to people who are giving us advice or who are rebuking us or trying to correct us. Sometimes the Lord will use an unlikely messenger to try to get through to us. And the reason I want to talk about this is because for many years, for probably like the last 20 years or more, I've been seeing this phrase on t-shirts that teenagers sometimes wear. And it's often Christian teenagers who wear this, a t-shirt that says, "Only God can judge me." And yesterday I was driving around and I saw the same phrase on the back of somebody's pickup truck. "Only God can judge me." And I feel like that's a very, very foolish phrase, because why would you want God to judge you? Why would you want that? When people judge us, the worst that could possibly happen is that they would kill us and maybe torture us before they kill us. But they can't put us in hell. And God is the perfect righteous judge who can put us in hell. And even on this earth, he judges people and he punishes people for their sins sometimes on this earth because he wants them to change and repent so that they can go to heaven. And so to say only God can judge me, it's like you're pronouncing a curse on yourself. You'd be way, way, way better off if you would let people judge you, because typically, like I say, the worst people can do is kill you, but it's very rare that they would do that. Usually when people judge you, they'll give you the evil eye, or they'll unfriend you, or they'll backstab you and gossip about you, or they won't include you in their parties, or they might not hire you for a job or something like that. But that is like little to no persecution, I mean, that's nothing. We can all live with that. But can you live with being cast into hell for all eternity? You see how it's so much worse if God judges you. If you're in sin and people, or if you're about to make a bad decision, or you've already made a bad decision, and people come against you and rebuke you and judge you and try to tell you to change your ways, they're doing you a favor. Because if you would only humble yourself before the Lord and listen to them, you'd be saved a world of hurt, and possibly you'd be saved your soul, So it's utter foolishness to not listen to what other people tell you. There's nothing more foolish. And I've learned from experience in my life, there were two key times in my life, very crucial times in my life, where I refused to listen to the message because I didn't like the messenger and I didn't respect the messenger. And that's very common for young people, to disrespect those who rebuke them and try to correct them. And so then they go deeper into sin, and then they are going to face the judgment of Almighty God. And that's nothing good to be putting on your t-shirt. That's not good. It's better to say, "Let grandma judge me," than to say only God can judge me. Because grandma is just going to wag her finger at you, and she's going to do it in love. Whereas Almighty God, if you do it before his throne, if you let him judge you before his throne, it's not going to be pretty. Well, anyway, there were two crucial times in my life where I refused to be judged or refused to take advice because I didn't like the people who were giving it. The first time was right before I got married. I told my best friend that I was getting married, and I was talking to her on the phone when I told her this, and she was just screaming at me to the top of her lungs. It was blood-curdling screams. She was furious beyond belief. She lost all control, and she had no thoughtful feeling for me at all. She just became a hater, an instant hater. And she told me I was making a big mistake, and she was screaming. She humiliated me because I was at work when I was telling her this, and one of my coworkers came into the room, and she was screaming so loud at me over the phone that he could hear. And it was like very, very, very embarrassing and humiliating for him to hear her screaming at me like that. And it showed that I had no respect at all, in her eyes. And so that was like so horrible. And then she disowned me as a friend, and she treated me horrible after that. And I tried to stay her friend, but she just completely hated me. What was going on was, I was making a bad decision to get married, but she was mainly upset, not because she cared about me, but because she was angry that she wasn't getting married. You see, all she ever cared about her whole life was getting married and having a family. And she and I were both older than we wanted to be at get married. And all of her other girlfriends had already gotten married, and she had gone to all their weddings and cried at all their weddings because it wasn't her. And I was her last girlfriend who was single. And so when I told her I was getting married, she just unleashed all of her fury on me. She was so angry. She was angry at God and angry at me, because how dare I? Because she didn't really respect me a whole lot to begin with. And she saw me as being lower than her. And me, of all people, I should not have gotten married before her in her mind, And so she was just livid. And that basically ended our friendship. But she was right that I was making a big mistake. She could see that I was making a big mistake, that I had chosen the wrong person. But what she was really upset about was that I was getting married at all. That was what really upset her the most. So I could see that was what really upset her the most. And so I disregarded everything she said. I just disrespected and disregarded her advice because I thought it was all selfish based and it was all about her. So why should I listen to her? But her rebuke to me was actually correct. I was making a huge mistake, and I suffered many years for it because, I went ahead and got married. So that's one example of where I refused to accept someone's rebuke because I simply didn't like the messenger, which was my friend who ceased to be my friend. And then later on, towards the end of my marriage, this is a weird story, but I'm going to go ahead and share it because it really makes a point of how God tries to reach us sometimes through the most unlikely people. And we need to be humble and let him reach us in spite of the fact that we don't like those people or we don't agree with them or something. 6 years later, towards the end of my marriage, that I didn't even know it was the end of my marriage, for the first time in my life, this has never happened, the only time in my life, because it's never happened before or since. God told me he was going to bless me in a unique way, and he told me in advance, and he's never done that before or since. But it happened in a job where I had this lady who was my coworker and my supervisor, and I didn't really like her because she had gotten divorced and remarried. But that wasn't my problem. My problem was every day she would harp about how her ex-husband had treated her really bad and it was all his fault that they got divorced. And it was like every single day she would harp about it. And I just couldn't accept that it was all his fault. And I was like, you're so annoying. That's probably half the reason that, you guys couldn't get along was because you're annoying. Because she annoyed me, I didn't tell her that outwardly, but in my heart, I would say, boy, this woman is obnoxious. I wish she would just stop complaining about her ex-husband. I don't want to hear it anymore. And so on almost a daily basis, she would go on and on and on about how her ex-husband was abusive. And I was like, you're so obnoxious, who, it's just, I just disregarded everything she said. And I thought, well, I kind of almost half feel sorry for her ex-husband. So So it turned out that, well, what happened was the job I had when I was working under her was a part-time job, and I was only making $530, bringing home $530 a month. And I needed a better job. I needed more hours and more income. And so I thought, I'm going to do a quick little Google search here and just see if there's any jobs out there in the community that I could apply for. And so I did a quick little search, and immediately this job came up. I was only going to one website where the college that I wanted to work at. And so I thought, this will just take a minute. It's okay, I can do it. So I went onto that college website. Immediately a job came up that I knew I was qualified for, and it would pay 4 times what I was making. So I was like, okay, that's it. I'm going to apply for that job. But immediately when I saw the job and I read the description and everything, the Lord, clear as a bell, he told me, I'm going to give you that job. And I knew for an absolute 100% fact that it was the Lord speaking to me, and that it was true, that he was going to give me the job, even though I hadn't even applied yet. And I thought to myself, this is so weird, because the Lord has never told me anything like this before, that he's going to bless me in any way, and specifically to give me a job. He's never spoken to me like this before. And I thought, this is so weird. Why would he tell me that he's going to give me this job? And I thought of turning around to her, because she was sitting behind me at her desk. And I thought of telling her, hey, you know what? See this job here on this website? The Lord's going to give me this job. But I thought, nah, I'm not going to tell her. She'll never believe me. And I didn't want her to nose into my private business. And so I just kept my mouth shut. I didn't say anything. But what was really a bad choice was I never asked the Lord, why are you telling me this? Why are you going to give me this job? And why are you telling me that you're going to give me this job? Because I knew God had blessed me in the past in different ways, but he never announced it ahead of time. Well, but I had no faith at that time. I was not a born-again Christian. I was just a religious Christian. And it never occurred to me that I could get an answer from God if I asked him a question. So I didn't bother asking. And I didn't have the faith to ask. And so I just pondered it in my mind, and I thought, well, I guess I'll never know. And I didn't even bother asking him. So I knew I was going to get the job before I applied. I went home that day. I didn't apply at work because I thought that would be unethical, taking that much time at work. So I waited until I got home and I applied. And then I knew I was going to get the job before I put in my resume and all that electronically. I knew I was going to get the job before I applied. And then I knew I was going to get an interview before they called for an interview. I knew they were going to hire me before the interview, during the interview, and after the interview. So I went in relaxed. I went out relaxed. And I just knew I was going to get hired, not because of my qualifications or because it was a fabulous interview, because it wasn't. It was just an average interview, nothing special about it. But I knew when I left the interview that I had the job, because the Lord had already told me before I even applied that I had the job. And it was never the slightest doubt in my mind. It was so clear when his voice spoke to me. Nothing could be more clear. And so when they called to hire me, I wasn't a bit surprised. I just said, thank you, but I was not surprised at all. I was expecting the call. And so they hired me. Now, I ended up telling my husband that I got hired, so he knew where I worked. And I never told this woman anything. I just put in my 2 weeks notice and said, blah, 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 I'm leaving you now. I got a better job. And I never told her anything. But if I had simply had the faith to ask the Lord, why are you telling me that you're giving me a job? He would have revealed the rest to me. He would have told me what to do. He would have said, listen, this lady that you work for, she's going to help you get out of your marriage. You don't tell your husband that you're getting this job. Tell her instead. She's going to help you escape. What happened was, I didn't know. When I saw that job on the internet and she was sitting right behind me, like a foot away, because we had a super tiny office where our chairs were almost back to back. And she was like a foot away, sitting right behind me. And what I didn't know at that time was that I was going to be divorced within a few months. I had no plan whatsoever of ever getting a divorce. At that point in my life, I thought I was going to be married till either me or my husband died. And I had no idea that a divorce was coming. And God, He worked out a series of events that caused me to have an encounter with a police officer. And the police officer explained to me that I needed to get a divorce. And it was an accident encounter. And when he told me that, I was like, yeah. And, we ended the conversation. But as soon as the conversation was over, I was like, he's right. I really need to leave, Anyway, God worked all that out, and I didn't see any of that coming. And so if I had simply asked the Lord, why are you telling me that you're giving me this job? He would have revealed the rest of his plan and said, because I'm getting you out of your marriage. You're going to be divorced in a few months. This woman who sits behind you, she and her husband are going to help you out. See, she was in a place in her life where she was willing and able and eager to help me get out of my marriage. But I deliberately never told her that I was having marriage troubles of any sort. I deliberately didn't tell her that I was being abused because I didn't respect her and I didn't trust her. And so I kept my mouth shut and I never told her anything. I also didn't tell her that the Lord told me He was going to give me that job. And so her husband was super nice. She and her husband were actually in a ministry where they were helping women, abused women, and he had a truck, and they could have easily gotten me out of my husband's house within an hour because I had very few belongings. With his truck and their abilities and willingness, they were already constantly helping women in need. And because of her background with her marriage, she would have been overjoyed to help me get out of my situation. And God had provided all the means and all the ways, all the resources for me to get out of my marriage clean without any stress or trouble. See, my husband was working out of town, which was also interesting. The Lord had made him have a career change so that he ended up working out of town regularly. They could have moved me out of the house in 1 hour, literally in 1 hour, with her husband's truck while my husband was out of town. And the laws where I lived were that you did not have to give your address to the court if you were in danger of physical abuse. You could keep your address a secret. And so I didn't have to divulge my address. And if I had not told my husband where I lived, he would have never been able to, where I worked, he would have never been able to basically harass me and hunt me down at work. And so it would have been, the Lord had prepared a way, even though I wasn't living for Him, I was not a born again Christian, I had virtually no faith. He had prepared a way for me to get out of the danger zone. But as it turned out, I didn't ask Him why He was giving me the job, and I didn't humble myself to trust that woman to tell her what my situation was. The whole time I worked with her for about 6 months, and the whole time I worked with her, I knew that she was, if anybody could help me, it was her. I knew that I was being terribly abused and all this kind of stuff, and that I needed help, but I didn't want to turn to her because I didn't respect her, because I didn't like her personality. And I didn't like that she complained all the time about her ex-husband. And so I never wanted to turn to her and trust her and listen to her. But she was the one person, God deliberately put her in my life. He deliberately gave me that job where for the first time I could support myself. He deliberately put my husband in a situation where he was working out of town. He deliberately had that woman working in a ministry where she could help women, and her husband loved to help women too, and he was the sweetest man in the whole world. And all of the way was totally paved for me to get out clean, easy, totally totally stress-free, totally safe, totally provided for. Now, on top of that, because I didn't listen to the Lord and I didn't ask him any questions, I ended up spending almost $7,000 to get out of my marriage that was completely unnecessary. And I also ended up turning to somebody else who was a wolf in sheep's clothing. And I turned to that person for help because I respected that person. Well, that person was a wolf who just saw an opportunity to use me, and whereas this woman who I disrespected was actually the one who wanted to help me. So I ended up having a very stressful divorce, and I had to go into hiding, and I still got harassed at my new job, and nobody helped me, and I ended up paying $6,500. And on top of all that, I went deeper into sin because this wolf personality led me deeper into sin. So all of that happened because for two reasons. Number one, I didn't ask the Lord why he was revealing to me that he was going to give me the job. But more importantly, I didn't like the messenger who was sitting behind me for 6 months every single day telling me that she helps abused women. I didn't like her. So I didn't listen to her message. And God had me working with her, I think it was about 6 months. Every single day, she was harping on me, telling me that she loved to help abused women. But I didn't like her, so I didn't listen. Can you believe that? Well, after about a year after I got divorced, it all came together in my mind, and I finally realized why God had told me he was giving me that job, because he wanted me to ask him, why are you telling me this, and what do you want me to do next? And then he would have revealed the rest of his plan to me, and he would have told me, don't tell your husband you're getting a job, tell this woman instead, she'll help you escape, blah, blah, blah. She and her husband are going to help get you out. Then I wouldn't have fallen into the hands of the wolf who destroyed my life as I was getting my divorce. And I wouldn't have paid all the money, and I wouldn't have been harassed and everything. God had made a way, but I didn't like the messenger. So I suffered greatly in both of those times in my life. The first time, because my friend, I didn't like her, the way she treated me. So I didn't listen to her when she told me not to get married. And I suffered for 6 years, devastating suffering, because I didn't listen to her. And then when it was near time for me to get divorced, and I didn't even see it coming, because I didn't like the coworker who sat behind me and was my supervisor, I didn't listen to her, who was daily telling me for 6 months that she was there to help, and I disregarded. So then I had a messy divorce that was very painful, and that cost me a lot of money and myself, and I went further away from the Lord and further into sin. So that's my hard that's how I learned that you don't disregard the message just because of the messenger. And I pray to God that the next time somebody tries to give me advice, that I will be humble and listen, no matter who they are, if they smell bad, or if they're a cranky person, or if they're obnoxious, or if they themselves are a sinner, or if they're screaming at me in my face. I hope that I will be humble and listen. And I also pray that all those teenagers who wear the t-shirt that says only God can judge me, that they will, the light bulb will come on, and they will realize how self-righteous that t-shirt is, and that they will not feel that way anymore, and they will welcome the judgment of their human peers and friends, and heed the judgment and the rebuke of other people, so that they don't end up in hell one day. So anyway, I hope that ministered to you, and we just all need to be humble. None of us are humble enough. Jesus is the most humble person who ever walked on this earth, and all of us will be closer to him and closer to heaven if we humble ourselves as well. Okay, God bless you.